There's supposed to be a tree near where I live that's covered in moths. It's an old maple with a trunk as thick as a car, short with roots bulging out of the ground at its base. In the early spring, the teachers from the nearby elementary school would put a tap in it and hang a bucket, and they would make maple syrup with their students. Then, the tree died. Its colour became like ash, the leaves withered as soon as they sprouted, and the sap stopped flowing. The teachers no longer tapped it in the spring, and people stopped going to it and eventually forgot where it even was. I never saw the tree when it was alive. It died 5 years before I moved here to take over my aunt's bookstore after she was diagnosed with breast cancer. She's in remission now, but I like this town, and so I found a job in the city, and I've stayed. I spend my evenings at the bookstore. It's different from my day job, so it doesn't feel like work. My aunt makes tea, and we share it with the locals that stop by. We're mostly here for the tourists. They come to see the lake, boating in the summer and ice skating in the winter. Half our store are books, and these are for the locals. The other half of our stock is mass-produced curios selected to look unique so as to entrap the tourists. We also have a small selection of locally produced crafts. The nursing home has a knitting club, and we buy from them. I've heard stories of the tree since I moved here. A local man first told me about it while I was restocking the maple syrup and assorted maple candies. He said that he went to the elementary school and remembered making syrup with the teachers. It wasn't as sweet as the store-bought stuff, and it was thinner. The teacher made pancakes to pour it on. I said that sounded like a nice tradition, and he sighed and stared pensively out the window. "The tree is dead now," he said sadly. He doesn't even remember how to find it again. Everyone had the same story. Those that grew up here remember eating the syrup at school and lamented that their children wouldn't have the same experience. Then I heard another story from a woman that worked at the nursing home. She was dropping off some more scarves the knitting club had made and told me that the year the tree died, a bunch of elementary school kids had gotten sick. It was the sap, she said, although the doctors didn't agree. But they'd gotten terribly sick, with fever and vomited thin, black liquid. A lot of them were hospitalized. One died. Then, the next spring, the teachers went out and found the tree had died over the winter. It was the sap, she reiterated. It was poison. 3 years ago, I began to hear a new story. People would stumble upon the tree while out for walks in the woods. They'd stray off the path and find themselves in a clearing of bare dirt with the old maple tree in the middle, its roots choking off all contenders that would try to move into the clearing. Its branches covered the sky, dark like they'd been burnt, a jagged lattice of brittle wood. The surface of the tree, they said, seemed to be moving, like the tree was shivering. It was covered in moths. They coated the trunk, slowly fanning their wings, and they clung to the branches like paper leaves. It was such an odd sight, they said. I decided I wanted to see this tree for myself. It felt like a rite of passage that I'd missed out on. My aunt had eaten the maple syrup, and my mother had too. While the sap no longer flowed, I felt I could at least visit and see it with my own eyes. I left just after midday for the path that wound through the woods. It was odd that no one remembered quite how to find the tree. I'd asked, but no one was certain anymore. It had been visited enough in the past, however, that there had to be a trail or a marker of some kind. I walked slowly, watching the edge of the trail for packed earth and leaves that would mark the remnant of a footpath. I watched the tree trunks for some sort of human marking, and I was so intent on locating these signs that I somehow failed to notice that I was straying off the path. I turned around and found that I'd managed to go far enough that I couldn't see the trail behind me at all. I cursed my stupidity. Fortunately, this stretch of forest wasn't particularly large, and so, as long as I walked consistently in one direction, I'd come out near a landmark. I got out my phone and checked maps first. It couldn't get a GPS signal. I wasn't terribly surprised. I opened a compass app instead and picked west, as I was on the western side of the loop and presumably had blundered inward. This would get me back to the trail the fastest, if I was correct. I hadn't walked very long before I came to the clearing. 10 minutes at most. I saw the trees clear out ahead, and I put my phone in my pocket, heart beating faster in excitement. My carelessness in wandering off the trail had turned out well for me, as I apparently managed to steer myself right where I wanted to go. The clearing lay before me, and the old maple in the center. It was every bit as large as the locals said. The tree grew outward instead of up, the trunk branching low enough that I could possibly climb up into the split if I stood on the tallest of the exposed roots. I approached it slowly, not wanting to scare off the layer of moths that currently rested on its bark. They fanned their wings, a rippling carpet the color of parchment, like they'd been cut out of the old, used books we kept at the back of the store. The parts of the tree that were exposed were blackened, and I wondered if it had been struck by lightning, and that had been what killed it. There was an area not covered by moths, and I could see the faint ring of the tap hole scar. I moved closer to look, stepping on the roots that broke the surface of the barren earth. I heard the sound of scratching. I whipped around and looked behind me, startled by how close it was. I saw nothing. Just a squirrel, I thought, climbing a tree somewhere. Then, I heard it again, and this time I held still and listened intently, trying to locate the source. Behind me, from the trunk of the tree. I turned around again and stepped closer to the trunk. The moths did not stir. The noise was unmistakable now. The faint sound of claws from inside the tree. I eyed it, wondering if rot had hollowed it out and perhaps some animal had fallen and was trapped within. I traced the line of the trunk up to the split, searching for a crack. I reached up and gently waved my hand past the moths, and they fled, rising into the air like ash in the wind. Beneath them was a crack in the tree, the width of a hand. The seam travelled down the trunk, almost reaching the tap scar. The wood at the split was breaking away, pieces jutting outwards in shards that barely held onto the rest of the trunk. I seized one and pulled, thinking if I broke it free and opened the gap in the trunk lower, then whatever was stuck inside could get out. I had to put all my strength in it. I braced myself with one foot against the trunk of the tree, and I pushed with my legs and pulled with my arms. And then it snapped, and my momentum threw me backwards. I lost my balance amidst the roots, and I fell. I think that saved me. For as I fell, I watched in horror, like the world was slowing down, as a hand, like a human hand, but the fingers were long and ended in point-like fingers, shot out from the gap and grabbed at the space my wrists had just been. Its flesh was like ash, and thick pieces of it flaked away with every movement. Its fingers wrapped around the broken edges of the wood and pushed, and the groan of the tree's resistance sounded almost human in my ears. Those pieces of shed flesh, that ash, flickered in the air, and then it rose upwards, spreading wings as a new moth was born from it and went to join its brethren at the trees. I stumbled to my feet, staggering backwards, my gaze locked on the thing trying to force its way free from the tree's trunk. The moths were agitated now, fluttering from branch to branch, so that the entire tree shivered like sand being washed away with a tide. Then, another piece of wood cracked away, opening the seam up another inch to reveal the darkness inside the trunk. The creature's hand paused in their work, and something moved inside, shifting to press. A head against the open seam. I saw the pale grey flesh split. Moths poured out of the trunk as its skin peeled back to reveal a black pit of a throat and a line of sharp, obscenely long teeth. It screamed. The noise pierced my ears, and I shrieked too, in pain, in terror, in an effort to drown out that sound. A cry of anguish and hate, the likes of which I hope to never hear again. The moths fled. They exploded from the tree in a cloud and spiraled upwards towards the sky. I fled with them, my ears filled with the snapping of wood as that thing fought to free itself from its prison. I ran until I found the trail, slowing only when my lungs seized up and could no longer draw in oxygen. I would catch my breath, gasping for air, and then run again. I continued down the trail in this manner, not daring to look back, fearing that any moment I would hear that creature's scream again and know it was behind me. I almost cried when I reached where I'd parked my car. I unlocked it with shaking hands and drove straight home. I've been trying to think of who I could tell this to all afternoon. My aunt? The police? Would they believe me? Even if they did, I didn't know if I could lead anyone to the tree again. Like everyone else, I've forgotten how I got to it. I don't think I knew to begin with, seeing as I found it by accident. I wish I could tell everyone, could warn them that something was inside the tree, and maybe that was why those children got sick, and why that one died. I wish I could tell them that it's broken free. I've wrote this up, and I've been sitting on it, wondering who to send it to. I'm posting it here because I think I'm out of time. It's dark now. It's been dark for a little bit. I keep looking out the window because I'm scared, and I don't know what's out there. About 15 minutes ago, I noticed that the streetlight outside had gone out. I looked out the window to see why, and found that the bulb hadn't burned out, but rather, the lamp was covered in moths. They swarmed over it, blocking out the light, their bodies dripping to fall loose into the air, and then they flew back up and rejoined the rippling mass of insect bodies. I feel sick looking at it. It's an unnatural thing. I've gotten my pistol out. It's sitting here, loaded on the desk. I'm listening to the sounds outside, and if I hear anything strange, I'm calling the police. The streetlight isn't the only light the moths have covered. They've swarmed my porch lights as well, and now they've started to cover the windows. I can hear their bodies hitting the glass as they land, and the faint vibrations of their wings in a constant hum. I think the thing in the tree has broken free. I think it's coming for me.